Welcome to Men's Health Week and a chat that I'll be doing tonight. So this is predominantly aimed at men and a men's conversation, but women are more than welcome in this conversation in this space tonight. So what I'll do is I'll just tread water for a few minutes while we wait for a few people to get into the call. And what I'll ask you to do is just to give a shout out or give an emoji as you come into the space. Even if you're watching this as a replay, please just give a shout out. You know, this is a pretty important time that we're in, pretty important transition through COVID and then back out the other side. And, you know, this can really affect the mental health of men and women. And we can see that, you know, the massive statistics that we have around men's suicide in Australia today is just a true reflection of where the story is for men and their mental health. And I know personally, my story around mental health was quite a journey, and it took me quite a while to understand things that I should have probably been taught as a young boy, awareness that I should have had transitioning into being a young male, and role models that I should have had growing up to show me these things and to teach me these tools that I should carry into today's age. So this is quite an amazing evening, and we're going to have a lot of topics to cover. So I'd just like to say that, firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to the Happiness Co for putting on this amazing platform. How beautiful is it that so many people from around the world and around Australia, and Perth included, can come together to be supported, to learn, to raise their awareness, to be heard, to be seen, to come together as a community and support each other through COVID. So, this can be a really amazing time, and, Happiness Aid Live has been a really, really massive part of that. So I'd just like to give a round of applause to Julian and to all of the Happiness Co staff that have been doing all of the scheduling and all of the presenters that we've had on over the last few months for being able to support men and women in their mental health through this stage. It's super important. I'm very passionate about it, and it's really, really beautiful to be able to be a part of something like this, where we can come together as a community. We can use the advantage of Facebook and technology to start to think outside the square and start to support one another from a place of care and compassion. So that's really powerful. If you're coming into the group, I'll just get you to give a bit of a shout out, give a wave. Just as I said earlier, I'm just treading a little bit of water until we have a few more come on the call, and then we'll get stuck into some of the juicy topics around this evening for Men's Health Week. So a few of the topics that we'll be covering: anger, tears and sadness, porn, intimacy, vulnerability, projection, alcohol, asking for help. So there's some really amazing topics tonight that we'll be covering to help men and especially women understand more about men and their inner world and what's going on for them and why they might be acting in certain ways, etc. So such an amazing topic to be able to talk on tonight. And I didn't realise how passionate I was or how much I had to say on this topic until I started to write down some notes of what I was going to talk about tonight. So I had a rough idea of, what I was going to talk about tonight, and I started to write down some points to say tonight, and it just flew, and there was so many to talk about. So I realised how passionate I am on this subject, and just how much work I've done on myself to be a better man, and the places that I've come from. And the Happiness Co, we talk about the traffic light system, the green, the yellow, and the red. Yep, no hat tonight. I got the hair out. It started to grow back a little bit. But I can put it on if you'd like, Fleur. So that we talk about the traffic light system in the Happiness Co model. We've got the green, the yellow, and the red. And what the Live Aid has all been about is about supporting people in and allowing them to stay in the green and not slide down into the yellow. And if they do, they can get back out through some of the amazing tools that they've learned in these workshops and what you might hear tonight. But unfortunately, myself and some of the other coaches through our lived experience in the Happiness Co were in the red. And ultimately, I was in the red. I was using a lot of these things that we're going to talk about tonight, such as drugs, porn, alcohol, lack of intimacy, lack of self-care, all of these things. So, I speak from my own personal journey, not from reading books or from other people's knowledge, just purely my own learned experience. And I'm really grateful to be able to share that tonight with you and with other men as well too. So it seems like there's not a lot of men in the group just yet, so I'm just going to hold off a little bit and before we get started. But thank you for all of the amazing women that are tuning in and here to understand and support men in Men's Health Week. And I guess this is probably a bit of a segue or an intro into discussing that just how much work women have done on themselves over the last 20 or 30 years, and how much you guys are leading the space in this personal development world. And in the last 20 to 30 years, women have been writing books, doing yoga, working on themselves, basically upgrading themselves. And I feel like us men are a little bit behind. So it's now the time for us guys to really do the deep work on ourselves, to look at our own trauma, to look at our own past, look at the things that might be holding us back from being the best version of ourselves and start to become the leaders inside society that we once were. I think that, we've lost our position in society to be, healthy role models and to kind of lead from the front. And, there's so much of this toxic masculinity that exists out there in the world today. And we can see it everywhere. We can see it in large corporations. We can see it in our relationships. And I know personally that I display and have displayed a lot of these qualities in my life, and still healing parts of those within myself as well too. There's still parts of my masculinity that I'm working with and accepting and not judging and loving and working through. So it's quite a big journey for all men and for all women to go through, because the journey of healing the masculinity is such a big part of the women's journey in life as well too. So very, very powerful and such an amazing topic to talk on tonight in Men's Health Week. And we all know that our health is so related to our mental health. So the Happiness Co has got an amazing focus on men's mental health in Men's Health Week. And we had a really amazing opportunity today. This is my third live workshop that I've done. So we were able to tune into quite a large corporation, an oil rig company today, and provide a platform to the rigs and to people in town, and to get the message of preventative mental health tools out into the world, which was really amazing. And I'm very blessed to be able to work with the Happiness Co and Julian and Robbie and all of these amazing people to help get the message out of preventative mental health, that we can stay in the green. So very thankful for my day, very thankful that this is the third time that I've got to speak to an audience and to put this message out there. So just to give a quick insight into who I am, I know a lot of you actually know my story, so I won't go too deeply into that tonight so we don't miss out on the men's mental health stuff. But I was a veteran in the Australian Army for 10 years, and that seen me deployed overseas, and I come back and I had PTSD. My mind was a mess. My heart and my emotions were a mess. My nervous system was a mess. My behaviours and my actions were a mess, and I was riddled with shame and guilt and all of these things. So everything that I'm going to speak to tonight is a real true indication of something that I've worked through myself, and I speak from experience. And the first topic that we'll talk about tonight is anger. So we all know that anger is an emotion. We can see it behind me on the board here, and it's such a powerful emotion. And often anger, for myself personally, and I can see this speak on behalf of other men, that anger is often a protection mechanism. We are sensitive. Men are sensitive. We do have a heart. We do have feelings. We do have emotions, and we can be quite gentle. And I know I speak from myself personally that I'm turning into a gentle man. And I know that anger is a protection mechanism for me to protect myself, to get out of my space, to protect my environment, to protect my inner world, protect my emotions. And that's a survival instinct. It's something that's part of us, and something that can be quite beautiful, but can also be quite destructive. I speak from personal experience that my anger and my violence has got the better of me many times in my life, and I have been violent, and I have been very forceful in my language, in my body positioning, in my actions towards other people. So the greater awareness that men can have on their anger, greater awareness that they can have within their inner world to understand their own boundaries and understand how they feel and what they're actually protecting, and to deal with some of the emotions that we have underneath, can actually allow us to totally transform our relationship with anger. So, I guess a really good place to start with understanding our anger is to ask some questions. It can be that simple. Just to ask ourselves a question. We have anger. We have anger as an emotion. It might be showing up in our world quite often. We might be very forceful in some points, and a really amazing place to start is just, why am I angry? Do I give myself permission to not be angry? Is anger something that I learn? Is anger a byproduct of me being unhealthy? Is anger a byproduct of me crossing a boundary? Is anger a byproduct of me doing something I don't want to do? Is anger a byproduct of that I have a wounded heart and I'm processing something? So you can see that there's many elements to anger. I remember as a young boy, I fell off my push bike and my handlebar went through my cheek, and when I went to my father to look for compassion, he got angry at me because I'd hurt myself, and that was just my father caring for me and protecting me. And but his display of anger towards me was when I needed compassion. So as a young man, I learned from my father that if I should be compassionate towards somebody else, that meant I had to display that in anger. And that was quite a confusing realization for me, that there was a lot of times that I should have been compassionate towards other people, but I was getting angry. And I couldn't understand why, if somebody else was upset or my partner was upset, that sometimes I'd get angry at her rather than having a level of compassion. And this is how silly and intertwined our emotions can be, and crisscrossed, and the way that they can kind of show up in our life in so many different ways. So just asking the question on anger is a really good place to start, and ultimately taking responsibility. I know that for each time that I've ever been angry or violent in the last few years of my life, or been forceful in my behaviour, I've really shown up for myself, and I've really taken responsibility for what I'm putting out into the world, and to actually really see that there's so many examples of healthy men out there these days that I can look up to. There's so many resources out there that I can read. There's so much awareness that I have that I can actually start to take responsibility for my anger. And if at any stage any men jump in here tonight and they've got any questions on anything that I talk about, please, let's make this like a two-way conversation. Let's use this time in here to help you maybe move through something that you might be stuck on. And I'd really like to make this a two-way conversation versus then just a one-way street. So, anger is huge. It's a huge topic. Our nutrition and our beers and all of the things that we're putting into our body can severely affect our emotions, and anger is one of them. The last point I'd like to make on anger is not shaming it. So ultimately, we can have a severe amount of shame in this world towards our emotions, and anger is one of them. That even though I can get angry and I can take responsibility for my anger, it doesn't mean that I actually have to shame myself or feel guilty for having a reaction. So if we are shaming ourselves and labeling ourselves a bad person and beating ourselves up for a reaction that might be beyond our control in that moment, ultimately that can be part of the problem as well too. And that can be a bit of a loop in us, acting out in certain ways and shaming those emotions and having a certain level of guilt for them as well too. So first topic is anger, very powerful one, and one that has touched a lot of men at the moment. So I've got a question here. yeah, so there you go. I've got a brother who's basically put out a statement here that's saying, yeah, they get guilty after being angry. Just what I was talking about, in a sense of, let's not be guilty for starters. Let's not shame our expression. But if we are irritable and short-tempered towards anything in our life, that's basically an indication that, we're not in alignment, that we're not living our life as best we could be. And we need to take some ownership and responsibility over some of the things that we have going on in our inner world, and to start with the big stuff first. So, how are you showing up for yourself? What is your diet? What is your activities? How much time are you spending towards self-care? Are you educating yourself? Are you making healthy choices to be a better version of yourself? Are you surrounding yourself with the right people? So, these are the things that are keeping us trapped in this irritable state. There's many layers to that, but, to just ask why and to give yourself to be a better to ask why and give yourself permission to be a better version of yourself can be the start for you moving through your anger. So next topic we've got up on the board tonight is tears and sadness. And often anger can be a protection mechanism that I discussed of for emotion underneath that we don't want to deal at. And often if we have quite a large amount of grief that, something bad might have happened to us just recently. We might have been grieving something, or we might have had a breakup, or somebody might have been involved in an accident or something like that, and we can have a lot of sadness on our heart. And anger can be a way that we're actually kind of projecting that out into the world and not actually acknowledging something that's underneath that anger. So, by us actually being aware that anger is existing in our life, that can give us the awareness to actually drop under what we're angry about and what actually exists under there. Often for men, we don't actually have a great deal of, and I speak on behalf of not all men here, but myself, we don't have a great deal of self-care. And when we don't have a great deal of self-care and self-love, then sometimes we don't have the ability to internally process our emotions. So we can use a projection, such as anger, to actually stop us from feeling what's going on here. If we have a level of self-love and care and the ability to self-regulate our emotions and the ability to self-soothe ourselves, when something comes in, we don't have to get angry and project out there. We can actually absorb part of that and hold it in ourselves. But ultimately that can take a fair bit of work for us to get to the point where we actually are deeply connected to our own heart and self-soothing ourselves and, deeply caring that, we can be more resilient to other stuff that's showing up in our life. And when we get below the anger and we get into our heart and we start to care for ourselves, we then actually start to create an environment where we can move through tears, where we can allow sadness. And, once again, we have a level of shame and guilt and stories from our past that we've learned that might be stopping us from really diving deep into that grief that we might be holding on to, or that sadness. And we really need to give ourselves permission to move through our tears and our sadness on our heart. But we also have to create an environment that allows us to do that. So if we're working really hard and we're not and we're drinking alcohol and we're going to the gym and we're always busy and we're living this fast-paced life, and the first thing we do when we wake up in the morning is have a coffee and scroll on our phone, we're not actually allowing our body to have any type of vitality. We're always in a rush, we're always moving, and ultimately our emotions can become kind of trapped in that as well too. We don't actually have the ability to sit down and cry and grieve and move through something and process something unless our life has the space and the ability for us to do that. And that can be a little bit tricky because, often unconsciously as an emotion comes up, we want to disconnect from doing all of these things. So, a new level of awareness or reading some books on this topic or, sending us a message would be a way that you can have a new level of awareness as to, are you actually disconnecting from an emotion through action? Are you not allowing yourself to feel something? Is your anger the byproduct of you not processing some sadness or tears that you had like on this journey or a while ago? So that's the topic of tears and sadness. So also, please still feel free to shoot out any questions. Girls, lovely ladies, if you have any questions this evening too around your journey with men and something that you would like to know as well too, if I can give you an honest answer, I will as well too. Go on in here. Yeah. So, we're talking about, there's a message here around a cycle of anger and guilt and shame, and 100%, where no one wakes up wanting to be a bad person. No male ever has the intention of ever reacting and being violent to a loved one. The people on the outside might see a man who's violent, who is using and projecting harsh language, who is displaying his emotions through physical violence, but ultimately there's not a conscious decision for him to do that, and no man is ever actually waking up in the morning and wanting to be violent. Ultimately it's always coming from a level of repressed emotion or unhealed trauma or bad behaviours that they've learned through their childhood of expressing and bad coping mechanisms and a level of unconsciousness. So, if we ever do see somebody who is kind of stuck in that level of behaviour, we have to have our boundaries to be able to remove ourselves from that vicious cycle of somebody projecting their anger into a relationship or into the world. And when we can kind of remove ourselves from that relationship and have boundaries there, then ultimately we can still have compassion for that person to go through their process. But we can also feel into our own self-worth by not continuing to be the victim of any of those displays of anger as well too. So yeah, it's that's a subject that goes around the whole entire world for a lot of relationships, and there just has to be the conscious awareness for men to be able to take responsibility when they're not reacting. We know that a reaction's a reaction, and trying to actually really solve anything in a reaction where there's anger or there's a deep expression of violence or a pattern that keeps on playing out is not really the answer, is to try and unpack it or to escalate it or to give your opinion in those times. It's really just to acknowledge that level of expression of anger or violence is actually just sadness and trauma and the inability for him to understand his own feelings and process them and have compassion and empathy in those moments. But then once that is completed, then have the responsibility as a male and as your partner to communicate that on how we can actually take some action on that. And that's what I do these days. I'm an emotional coach for men and women, and it brings me a lot of joy to be able to help men and women understand the emotions and to not have shame or guilt for that. And I even had an expression of anger at work the other day where I was triggered, and I expressed myself forcefully and via anger, and that's part of my constitution. I wouldn't say it's who I am, but when I do trigger, sometimes I do get angry and I do forcefully project my voice, and I don't shame myself. And it felt really amazing to be accepted for me to take responsibility for that, but then also for me to be accepted for who I was and to not be judged, and to have my co-workers just really understand that was me and that I am always doing the best that I can do, and to be really held and accepted in that. So, it's really big, and I must say that, it's been very dear to my heart, and to be accepted on this journey for anger that I have put out. And often for men, it can be a bit of Pandora's box, that when we actually do start this journey of self-development, and we remove the alcohol and we remove the jugs and we remove all of the disconnection methods, then we open up Pandora's box and all of these emotions can come out. And that's the real men's work. That's the ability for us to grow as men, for us to evolve, for us to get more in touch with our feelings and get more in touch with this person that we can be more vulnerable with ourselves and with others. And I'll touch on vulnerability in a little bit later, but that's our ability to remove these levels of disconnection and start to grow. So the next one is porn. I'll touch specifically on porn. So I know when I was in Afghanistan, I had a lot of fear come up. So I was getting rocketed. I had a lot of fight or flight responses that would show up in my body. And then ultimately I was disconnecting from that. So I was disconnecting from fear and I wasn't allowing it to be processed in my body. And what I did when repressing that fear is that I was actually using porn as a way to disconnect from emotions that I didn't want to feel in my body. So I was using the dopamine and the cycle of visually watching something, being trapped in my mind, kind of disconnecting from my body to actually disconnect from emotions. And that can get trapped in like a pretty vicious cycle. And I know a lot of guys are watching porn. I know that men in my coaching circles are still watching porn. I know that they still have a lot of shame and guilt around that, because I specifically asked 2 of them this week, have you watched porn this week? And that's not one of the things that I'm coaching them with at the moment. I'm coaching them around their emotions. And I said, have you watched porn this week? And they said yes. And I said, what kind of porn did you watch? And they both balked at the answer. And they had a level of shame and guilt and mask up and protection mechanisms and all these things around the question that I asked them. And the coaching point wasn't about the use of porn or why they were using porn. The question and why I asked that was for them to actually recognize the internal protection mechanisms and the walls that they put up and the way that they use their cognitive function to be able to disconnect from the question and to put up a mask and to put up a wall. So it was quite a powerful question and really amazing at allowing them to witness some of the ways that they can actually not be open and not express themselves, but then also see some of the shame and guilt that men might actually be having around using porn. So yeah, I definitely a number of years ago was trapped in a cycle of using porn, especially after coming back from Afghanistan. I was using porn as a way to still disconnect from my emotions, but also as kind of a way to stop me from, connecting to intimacy, because I had a level of disconnection from my body, from war, and then ultimately for me to be intimate and to be truly loving and to me to truly connect to a partner, I had to be vulnerable to do that. So then therefore, if I could use porn as a way to, not be intimate and not engage into a close relationship, that was like a nearly protection mechanism in itself. And then, to create a level of shame and guilt. And also we can kind of really be trapped in these cycles of shame and guilt that, that's a whole story in itself. But ultimately, when we understand that a lot of our behaviours can be driven from our repressed fears, our repressed sexual energy, our repressed shame, and when we can actually start to work on these and witness the power and the control that these can have over our life, they can be quite powerful as well. So just got a question here that I want to check out. So we've got a question here around the blame game and how do I not take things personally. So I spoke of earlier around projection and internalization. So, a lot of men can actually have really low self-worth. And I know specifically that I've had really low self-worth. And when we have really low self-worth, it can be very difficult for us to internalize that we've done something wrong, or internalize that we're not doing something amazing, or we're not doing something good, because men have been programmed for the last 100 years that we receive love, we receive money in our system, we receive pats on our back for doing good things. So we're very action based in the way that we receive love from our environment, from our relationships, and from our community. So when we actually seem to be not doing something right, or if there's if we've done something wrong, then it can be very difficult for us to be able to internalize that and take responsibility. And what we will do is we'll actually project that onto the other person. So that's really coming from the inability and the low self-worth for us to actually take responsibility and for us to not blame the other person. So when you can actually, the second part of the question is how to not take this personally. So I know, from experience, my words have been pretty harsh in the way that I've projected into some of my relationships, and to even be sarcastic in the way to elevate myself in a relationship. And that comes from a place of low self-worth and needing to make myself feel better through the words that I use and the stories that I tell myself. So, ultimately when you can see that your partner might be blaming you because they don't actually have the emotional capacity to internalize or take responsibility, it allows you to actually have a lot more compassion, and actually to have a lot more of an understanding of okay, if that person doesn't have the emotional capacity to take responsibility, to process that, nothing I do or say is really going to change his ability to emotionally process what's going on. If I actually take a step back and don't take things personally and don't actually overcomplicate his world, then he might have more space to actually unpack his own emotions. If he's going through a difficult time of understanding his own emotions, and then your projections are coming back over the top of your sensitivity back to him, that can just overwhelm him, which then can cause him to close down even more. But if he can actually have an environment where he can project, and I'm not saying that you have to allow your partner to just keep on projecting, but allow your partner to project in that instant, in that reaction, but then have a conversation with him at a later date that could possibly allow him to understand what's going on in there and what he's doing. So great question, and pretty complex answer, but still really, really amazing. All right, what do we got? It makes the partner feel inadequate. So when we feel inadequate, it challenges our self-worth, and then we feel bad. So, and we're told and programmed by the world around us that we feel good out of doing stuff by action-based self-worth. So when we can have a self-worth that is not action-based, that can be so powerful for us men. When we can know our self-worth without having to prove it to the people around us, is very, very powerful. So, the last topic we spoke about was porn, and then the next one I had up on the list was intimacy. So at the rate we're going through, we might even get through them all tonight, but that's a good thing. Maybe the Happiness Co family might bring me back on for another night. So intimacy is, I guess it's a level of openness, and vulnerability, intimacy and openness can all be kind of weaved into the same sentence. For us to be open with our nervous system, open with our posture, open with our body, and all of the ways that we can present ourselves into the world is very powerful. When we have that level of openness in our physical body, and it allows us to be not like this, it allows us to then be open emotionally as well too, and open with our words and the stories that we're telling ourselves and the masks that we're wearing. And vulnerability is a very powerful container for us to jump into, to explore, to level up, to remove through some of the shame and the guilt. And I speak personally from experience that when I was a young boy, I don't think I felt accepted for who I was, or I created a story that I wasn't accepted for who I was. And I know that there's a lot of men out there and women that can feel the same way, that, you know, how they were showing up in the world, this kid that wanted to be playful and wanted to touch the TV remote and wanted to just, you know, do silly stuff and wanted to just run around and didn't want to go to bed, and just wanted to be their crazy selves. And, you know, all of a sudden all of these rules are forced onto us. Don't do that, don't do this, don't do this. Getting in trouble, getting smacked for falling off your push bike. All these things of, you know, why we're, you know, getting told right or wrong. So then all of a sudden we have this story that how I show up as a male, as a young child, I'm not being accepted. And, you know, often that can be quite hurtful for a young boy to not feel accepted for who he is. And for whatever he seems to be doing, he keeps on seem to be getting in trouble. So what we can do there is we can kind of put up our walls. We can protect ourselves and say, right, we're not going to be accepted for who we are. Right, that's it. I'll start showing up in a way that sees me not being in trouble. But it's not really a true expression of who I am. It's not truly my playful, joyful self. It's just this image, this persona, this mask that's just put out into the world to see us be good or bad. And we try to be good. And then you can see from this mask and from this perception that we've put out into the world, that that's where our, you know, our action-based self-worth comes from, in the sense of that we keep doing things to make ourselves feel good, right? And if we're not feeling good through, you know, being a good person in the world and through actioning stuff within the world and action-based self-worth, we're then using drugs or alcohol or porn or these other things to still feel good, but feel good from a level of disconnection, to feel good from a level of dopamine or serotonin or like a artificial stimulation from our mind, but ultimately it's a level of disconnection from some of the pain that we might be feeling. But, you know, ultimately it's born from a level of us kind of projecting this perception of ourselves out into the world. So when we do that, we kind of have this story of how we see ourselves and how we need to present ourselves and how we need to show up in the world. And, you know, often that can lead to us not being fully vulnerable. And when we're in this state, you know, we're not truly relaxed. We're not truly our true self. We're, you know, we're always in our mind. We're always creating a story. We've got our guards up. We're protective. We're not actually fully just ourselves and drop and relax. So being vulnerable and being open can be a really amazing tool to see that we actually are accepted for who we are. And that when we share our deepest, darkest parts of ourselves and be vulnerable with what's actually going on, we realize that we are accepted for who we are and what's going on around us. And when we are accepted for who we are and what's happening, for who we are and what we're actually bringing to the world, this can be deeply transformational. And in that, we can drop our walls, we can relax, and then ultimately we can start to show up and be accepted for who we are. And then we can learn that, you know, vulnerability can actually make us feel good. And we don't actually have to feel good through doing action. We don't have to feel good through drinking or doing drugs, but we can be vulnerable to just allow ourselves to be open and to express ourselves. And when we're open and express ourselves, our nervous system, our body, our posture, and all of these things can improve, and we can just relax and we can just be in touch with who we are without needing to act in a certain way. And when we're not putting so much of our time, attention, and effort and our brain power and all these things towards needing to show up in a different way, and we just show up as ourselves, you know, that can be really, really amazing. And when we can just show up as our true self, we're, I guess, extraordinary. And extraordinary is, you know, us just being our true self. We don't have to achieve love or action through action-based self-worth. And then ultimately we can just be our true ordinary self. And in that, there's a certain freedom that can be received. So, you know, openness, vulnerability, and masks, they're all kind of interwoven into this one subject. But yes, so, you know, any men out there, be vulnerable. You know, it's a journey. It's definitely something that I've had to work on as well too. I am no angel. I have, you know, dived into the deepest parts of myself and the dark parts of myself as well too, and, you know, had a unfortunately, negative effects on the people around me and my loved ones in my life through, some of the negative aspects that I've held as a male, and I've put that out into the world, and I've hurt people, and I've hurt loved ones, and I've cheated on women, and I've done all of these things, but no man is ever waking up to be this version of themselves. No man is ever wanting to, cheat on their partner without actually, it's all unconscious. It's all just wounding. It's all just unhealthy behaviors. And, if we start to ask the questions, we start to be vulnerable, we start to do the work, we start to engage in man enough and coaching and all of these things, we can be the best version of ourselves. So there is a massive opportunity for men to really level up in 2020 at the moment. There's so many opportunities for us to take opportunity and take our life like truly by the horns, and to, practice openness, practice vulnerability, look through the mask, understand our anger, understand our sadness, and start to really, really level up, and not just transform our lives, transform the lives of our family and our loved ones around us as well too. So has anyone got any more questions? And fire them away. Please, if you've got more, please feel free to shoot them out. The next one we've got is kind of covered a few in that one. So alcohol and drugs was based off the opposite to action-based self-worth. We're using drugs or alcohol to disconnect from something that's going on within us. I spoke about projection earlier. So projection is, a male not having the self-care for them, or the emotional capacity for them to process internally, so they externally project it out. So it's quite a powerful one. And really that projection can be simple for a man as really just coming back to a level of care, coming back to, self-worth and self-care and these things, and actually developing a level of care for themselves, and in that gentleness and in that care for themselves, they can then basically become like a parent, where they can soothe themselves and control their emotions slightly through having a level of resiliency through care. But when we are not caring for ourselves and we're not looking after ourselves, anger can be our first reaction, and projection versus actually having the ability to care and take responsibility. Because when we care for ourselves, we can care for others. When we're mean to ourselves, we're mean to others. So yeah, projection is quite an amazing subject to understand. Just reading a little topic here. Thanks, Fleur. I love how much support you give me, and I really receive that. It means a lot to me to show up, and then to have amazing people like yourself to support me on my journey. And yeah, thank you for such a lovely comment. And I really want to recognise all of the work that you're doing in the PTSD space as well too. And thank you very much for being on here tonight and supporting me. It means a lot. So another topic is asking for help. So yeah, asking for help is another big one. And I think it comes back to our action-based self-worth, this image that we see of ourselves in our world, plus the patterns of behaviour that we've learnt, off our parents as well too. If we've ever seen our father, I speak from experience here, if we've ever seen our father kind of battling with something, and them getting frustrated, and them, taking all of the burden and all of the load of what they're trying to solve, and never asking anyone else for help, or never bringing people in for assistance, or making it a group decision, or saying, what do you think? Let's come in here and let's solve this together. That can be some behaviours that I learned as a child, and other behaviours that men have learnt in their childhood, and then ultimately we can take that on as males. So then therefore, it's not just our inability in the masks that we're wearing in the world that is stopping us from asking for help. It's also our husband or our father or our role models around us that we're not really seeing ask for help as well too. And I know that I've had issues with that lately. not lately, but on this journey, I've had to work through asking for help and needing assistance from other people. And a really good example of that was during COVID. I actually moved back into my apartment where I had all of my PTSD symptoms, and it was very a lot of triggers here and a lot of stimulation for me. And I wasn't really consciously aware of that. I moved back in here, and I thought that a lot of the unconscious behaviours and the triggers that I had in this house that I'd worked through. So during COVID, I had triggers come back up for me in my PTSD and stuff that I had to work through. And one of the ways that I asked for help, and I was deep in the PTSD journey. I was like opened up a time warp to 3 or 4 years ago, and I asked one of my friends who's a yoga teacher to hold me in classes every weekday for a couple of weeks, because I knew that some of my behaviours that were coming up and some of the ways that I was showing up for myself in life weren't the correct way. I didn't shame myself, I didn't judge myself. There was a lot of amazing awareness and stuff that I learned in that process, but I asked a brother for assistance. I needed help, and I asked him, and I said, can you please help me? Can I come over to your house every day? Can you please do this for me? Can you hold me accountable? And that's one of the ways that we can ask for help is, it doesn't necessarily have to be to a counsellor or to, a doctor, etc. We can ask for help before it gets to that. And we can just say to one of our friends, hey, I'm not feeling amazing this week. Could you just call me every night and check in with me and hold me accountable? And that's effectively what I was doing. And we can use one another to actually hold ourselves accountable. And a really good segue into this is to speak about men's work as well too. So I know that I just saw Corey jump on, so I'll give Corey a bit of a shout out, because I know that he does an amazing job to hold space for a men's work container over near Success. And I just want to celebrate that Corey's a guy who is showing up constantly for his community to hold a space for males. And I'd also like to celebrate Luke Smith, who's another guy who in Vic Park is holding men's circles, and one that I attend on Wednesday morning and have for nearly the last 18 months. And that ability for me to show up to my men's group every Wednesday morning, which is 8 or 10 guys just getting together and sharing and drinking a coffee or a turmeric latte or all of these brews in the morning, but just sharing our challenges and our wins and really allowing ourselves to be supported through whatever we're going through in our life, and really allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and to be open, to be seen and to be heard, and all of these things is deeply amazing. It's definitely been very transformational for myself, and also I think to see other men doing the work, so I can see that there is other guys out there, other role models that I can see to change some of my behaviours or change some of the stories around how men can show up in the world. And also for me to actually understand that it's okay to express my emotions. So what I want to touch on now is, a pretty real subject in the sense of, is a lot of times that men can express themselves in a relationship with their partners, and it can be triggering to the partner. And let's be honest, sometimes the truth of, why a man might feel like he's doing porn, and, that could be very touching conversation around why, a male might be watching porn. He might say that, he mightn't actually feel, sexually stimulated by his partner. Let's just say that, for example. And, for him to actually express his truth in a relationship around how he's actually feeling can then be met with a level of resistance or a trigger from his partner. So then that can basically reinforce the cycle for men that, what we actually have to say or what we have to express should be repressed and not actually be spoken about. So men's work was extremely powerful for me to get around this group of men in the morning, for me to actually recondition that what I have to say is okay and can be accepted. And ultimately I should be able to speak my truth in my relationship, and I should be able to know that that's okay and have a healthy enough relationship with my ability to express, and to then to also stand in my truth, and then to allow my partner to go through her process, or to allow somebody in a relationship to go through her process, based off what we're saying. And men's work is a really powerful tool for us to be able to do this, to develop a healthy relationship with our own expression amongst other men, to be seen, to be heard, to be held in that level of compassion and acceptance, and also to see that, you know, we're very similar on this journey, and that a lot of other men are riding the same ups and downs that we are, and we're all going through the same waves, and there's not a lot of difference between us all. That can be deeply deep release, and like take a lot of weight off our shoulders, and some of the expectations that we might be holding on ourselves as men, when we see other men going through the same issues, and we can kind of have comfort and a level of understanding that there's other men going through the same things that we are, and then together we can kind of start to, you know, have support through one another and hold each other accountable, and to make ourselves better. So, you know, I definitely would like to use this as an opportunity to express that there are many men's work circles across Greater Perth, across Australia, across the world. There's some online that you can attend to as well too. And I just really like to recommend that if any man is really struggling with their mental health, if they don't know what step to take beyond that of professional help and beyond the 24/7 calls that they can do, you know, reaching out to a men's work circle is a great place to start, where you can have amazing other men that are on a growth mindset as well, and that they're actually making healthy choices, and that they will hold you in their community, and give you examples of what healthy masculinity can be, and what leadership can be as well too. So, amazing topic, and one I can talk about all day. One that I have actually designated a whole chapter to in my new book. So I'll do a sneaky book plug here, but I am about to launch a book called Warriors War in about a week. Pre-orders are available, but it'll actually launch properly in about a week. And I've put a whole chapter of men's work in there, which has just been so important to me, and some of the places where men can find men's work, and some of the influences that there are in this global community of men's work, and something that's coming up, and something that's starting to build. You know, I spoke of at the start of this presentation of women doing so much amazing work over the last 10, 20, 30 years to transform the self-development space for women, and this men's work is starting to come through, and we can really see that. So it's quite amazing. So just look back up at my topic list tonight. What else have we got? All right, impressing our friends. Yeah, so that's a good one. You know, I guess that goes back to that initial subject of wanting to be accepted. And when I spoke about as men that we wanting to be accepted for who we are, and you know, when we're not being accepted for who we are, that this can really be quite shattering. You know, we are quite sensitive, and you know, when we are not accepted for who we are, that can be quite hurtful. So then therefore we have this tendency to want to get around other men, and then follow the social norm of behaving in a certain way that we think's accepted, kind of this like pack mentality, which ultimately isn't probably serving us, and isn't probably the healthiest choice that we could be making. It's not in alignment with, you know, probably the best version of ourselves. Yes, it can be you know, seem relaxing and seem, you know, to be fun, but ultimately our description or the story of fun by us getting around other men and drinking ourselves stupid and watching the footy and doing all of these things, personally, I speak for myself, is getting a little bit old in today's modern society. And if we think about, you know, where we've come from, you know, a few hundred years ago, that was a behaviour that like served us then, and you know, it's 2020 now. And, you know, is that level of, you know, drinking ourselves to, you know, the end of the night, constantly on the weekend, is that really serving us now in 2020? You know, is that social norm that we hold with other men around, you know, drinking and doing all of these things, is that really serving us as people? And, you know, and is that something that you can actually, still be accepted, know your own acceptance, know who you are, and go against that social norm to then not participate in some of those activities, because it's actually what we need as men. We do need this. We can see the level of suicide, we can see the level of mental health, we can see the level of challenges that so many men are having with their physical and mental health in the world, but then we're still continuing to, treat our bodies with such disrespect by drinking so much alcohol and taking up some of these behaviours, and then just calling that the social norm and thinking that it's okay. So that's my personal opinion on that. I'm not trying to project my beliefs onto any other men in the group out there, and I just guess that's my opinion and my authentic truth. And hopefully me living my authentic truth, that I can hold a new social norm with some of the other men out there in the world that are doing amazing things like this, for us to make change, and for men to slowly come across one by one to make a new social norm of where drinking ourselves all night long is maybe not the social norm, and that we can actually start to have a lot more compassion and care and understanding for our bodies and for our mental health as well too. Has anyone got any more questions out there? Let's have a quick scroll through. I'm sure there's maybe a few girls out there that have got a few questions that they want to ask about men. Come on, this is your last 5 minutes of any questions that you can ask around what might be going on in a man's inner world, and how they could actually understand that a little bit deeper in their relationship. And I guess one of the other topics we can go on based off that is the media. And ultimately I spoke about the social norm and what we're doing as men, and our environment, be it our social circle or our workplace or our media or the inputs on our phone or the content we're watching. All of these things are all intertwined, and they make us the man that we are. So when we can actually understand that the stuff that we're watching on TV and some of the stuff that we're allowing it to come into our mind and into our body can have quite a big difference on the way that we show up as men in the world, because we can be influenced. And that when we're not allowing the outside world to influence, we've got a joke here, somebody saying that they can't ask too many questions because he's sitting next to me. Right, good one. So why don't you practice a bit of openness and a bit of vulnerability there, Jody, by just asking the question. So yeah, by us actually understanding our environment and the stuff that's going on around us, we can actually really start to change or hold a space for us to be able to process some of the stuff that's going on. And I'll be honest, it's not an easy journey for us to be able to move through all of these emotions, for us to regulate our anger and accept our anger and not judge it, and for us to understand our porn use and all these things. So it can be quite the journey and quite the Pandora's box that we can open up if we choose to. And I'm not asking any man to change themselves. I'm not telling you how to do anything. It's just more of a this is me and this is the path that I'm walking, and ultimately you have choices out there of how you want to show up for yourself now. You have new levels of information of what other people are doing, for then you to have the possibility for you to be able to do that as well too, which is really powerful. So we've got last topic for tonight is self-care and self-love. So this is a really big one for guys and for girls, but Men's Health Week tonight. So men and using self-care. I spoke about this with another coach the other night around how our lives and our self-worth has been very action-based. So it's like, your partner or your husband wants to problem solve you when you've got a problem, because he gets self-worth out of that and makes him feel good. So when you come home from work and you're upset and your partner's trying to fix you, it's because he gets self-worth or self-gratification out of problem solving you, because that's one of the ways that he feels good. Or he might like to control his environment so he feels safe, so he's trying to help you through your emotions. But ultimately it could be that he's wanting to feel good through problem solving you and validating himself, and that's this action based world that so many men live in, that we're basically always taking action, and our identity can be based off action. It's like, how are you today? It's like, I'm good because I did this, and this. So then you can even see that we're basing our internal identity, or how we're feeling, based off what we've done. So you can see how our identity and our action is so entwined. So then therefore our self-care can be very similar. So we can always be taking our action, our self-care is a form of action as well too. So like, I'm going to go have a massage, or I'm going to meditate, or I'm going to do this, and they're all very action based, and we're caring for ourselves based off another action. And that's basically a level of our self-worth is action based, and our self-care can be action based. When our self-worth can actually be not action based, and just be truly self-worth. We know our self-worth, we're very loved, and we love and understand ourselves. And then our self-care can be not action based, but just actually we can care for ourselves, and that can be something that can be done in the moment, at any moment, and we can be connected to that. And that's a really powerful space for a man to be in and get to. But for us to get there, a really good place to start is action-based self-care. So, if a guy is actually going to tune in and do a meditation, or go for a walk, or choose the healthier food out of action, that's okay. And that's a really amazing place to start, is to take healthy action towards being the best version of yourself. But then ultimately, sometimes those actions can just keep on going. And we think if we take action, we're going to feel better. If we take action, that we're going to have more self-worth. But ultimately, that action is always at a distance. And we're always saying that if we get there, we're going to feel better. Or if we get and do that activity, we're going to care for ourselves more. But there's a distance there. And, every time you do that, the action or the distance is always external to you. So when you can actually just have that self-care and have that love and have that acceptance for yourself, and not allow it to be external to you and not be in the distance, and just allow it to be there and know that it is you, then that can be quite amazing, quite transformational, because then it's never at a distance and you can just accept it. So that's Men's Health Week. Matt Bruce from the Happiness Co. This is really, really amazing subject. I've loved being on tonight to talk about, a bit of the secret of the men's inner world, and what goes on, and why we show up in certain ways. It's been a very powerful conversation tonight, something that I've really loved to share. And thank you very much for listening. If you know any men out there that might like this particular topic, please send them this video, tag them in it, tag your partners, tag your cousins, tag your loved ones, and let them know that this amazing content exists out there. Also, there's so many amazing programs that exist for men in the Happiness Co as well. We had such a massive uptake in our 10-week challenge this time for men, which was quite incredible. So we had, nearly 50% of our participants are men in the 10-week challenge, which is huge, and absolutely love that. If any men have any specific questions that they would like to ask me, please add me as a friend, follow me on Facebook, follow my platform, Thriving with PTSD, and you can ask me a question specifically. I've got a lot of time to help anyone on their journey. If I can't get back to you straight away, I will at some stage. But just thank you for reaching out, and thank you for tuning in to Happiness Aid, and hope you have a lovely evening. Thanks, Matt.